Forget everything you think you know about American naval supremacy in the Persian Gulf. The story you have been told, that the United States Navy operates in those waters with unchallenged dominance, that its carrier strike groups are impenetrable moving fortresses of steel and firepower capable of deterring any adversary from any act of aggression, is not strategy, it is mythology. And that mythology was shattered in a single horrifying operational moment that the Pentagon has done everything in its considerable institutional power to bury, to minimize, to reframe in bureaucratic language specifically designed to prevent the American public from understanding what actually occurred beneath those waters on a night that naval historians will eventually study with the same forensic intensity reserved for the moments when foundational military assumptions collapse against the hard, unforgiving reality of operational failure in a contested environment. Let me be absolutely direct about something that certain officials in Washington are desperately hoping you will never fully comprehend. An Iranian submarine, operating in conditions that American naval doctrine had declared operationally impossible, positioned itself beneath a United States carrier strike group in the Persian Gulf and fired a weapons system at point-blank range against the most significant naval asset in the entire American military inventory. Not a warning shot delivered from a safe distance calculated to demonstrate capability without creating an incident. Not a passive demonstration of presence designed to establish an implicit bargaining chip. An active weapons engagement from a platform that should not have been there in waters where American surface ship sonar arrays, towed array systems, and maritime patrol aircraft were supposed to have detected, tracked, classified, and neutralized any submerged threat long before it reached that proximity to the carrier. The submarine was there, it fired, and the panic that followed reached through every level of naval command, all the way to the most senior offices in the Pentagon's E-ring, where admirals who had spent their entire careers telling Congress and the American public that the carrier strike group remains the unchallenged primary instrument of American power projection, had to confront the documented evidence of what had just happened in waters they were supposed to control absolutely and at all times. Having spent years working within military intelligence frameworks and having sat across tables from officers who devoted their careers to undersea warfare doctrine and the specific analytical problem of acoustic detection in thermally complex shallow water environments, I can tell you with the certainty that comes from professional experience rather than journalistic speculation that what happened in those waters represents something the United States Navy has not genuinely confronted in the modern era of carrier-centric power projection doctrine. This is not analysis designed to generate alarm for its own sake or to score political points against any institution or any set of decision makers. This is what actually occurred, and every American who believes their government is capable of being honest about the real state of American military capability in the Persian Gulf deserves to understand the full factual and strategic dimensions of what these events represent. Stay with me, because what I am about to walk you through will fundamentally and permanently change how you understand the real balance of power in the most strategically consequential waterway on the surface of this earth. The incident unfolded during a period of deliberate and carefully calibrated tension in the Strait of Hormuz, when the Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group was conducting what naval public affairs officers described to reporters as routine freedom of navigation operations. Routine is a word chosen with extreme deliberation by people trained in the craft of strategic communication and the management of public perception around military operations. It is engineered to project normalcy, to signal confidence, to tell adversaries and regional partners alike that American naval presence in the Gulf is unremarkable and unassailable and does not require any special explanation or context. None of those things were operationally true during the relevant period. The strike group had been operating under heightened defensive alert conditions for more than 70 hours prior to the incident, responding to confirmed intelligence indicating elevated Iranian naval activity across the broader theater. Multiple surface combatants from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy were actively shadowing the strike group at distances carefully calibrated to remain just beyond the engagement authorization threshold that American naval rules of engagement specify. That surface activity was the distraction. It was coordinated, deliberate, and precisely executed as the visible element of a multi-domain deception operation that Iranian naval planners had spent years rehearsing and refining in exercises conducted in the southern Gulf, away from American surveillance assets. What Iranian tactical planners understood with absolute operational clarity, and what American naval commanders had critically failed to internalize at the doctrinal and tactical level, is a principle that undersea warfare specialists refer to as the acoustic shadow problem in restricted littoral environments. In the Persian Gulf specifically, the thermocline layers, the physical boundaries between water masses of different temperatures, salinities, and densities that create abrupt discontinuities in acoustic propagation characteristics, create conditions that can render a sufficiently quiet submarine operating in ultra-low emission mode effectively invisible to hull-mounted surface ship sonar systems at ranges that would be considered catastrophically close in open ocean deep water operational environments, where American anti-submarine doctrine was principally developed and where American submarine detection technology was primarily optimized to perform. The Gulf is shallow, averaging less than 50 meters across vast stretches of the operational area relevant to carrier transit corridors. It is thermally warm near the surface throughout most of the operational year. It is stratified in ways that create acoustic pockets, propagation gaps, and sonar dead zones where sound simply does not travel in the predictable, mathematically tractable geometries that American sonar processing algorithms were designed and calibrated to exploit. Iranian naval engineers and their advisors from Russian submarine doctrine development programs and acoustic research institutions understood this environment with precision developed over decades of dedicated effort and specialized study. They had mapped the thermocline structure across every significant operational corridor in the Gulf through systematic measurement campaigns. They had built a submarine optimized specifically for operation within those acoustic conditions, and they had developed and repeatedly rehearsed the tactical employment doctrine for using that submarine against exactly the kind of target it encountered. The vessel was an Iranian Fateh-class coastal submarine. Let me give you the technical specifications in the detail they deserve, because without understanding what this vessel is physically capable of achieving in the Persian Gulf environment, the magnitude of what happened cannot be fully appreciated. The Fateh displaces approximately 593 tons submerged on operational load, making it significantly smaller and acoustically more manageable than the conventional submarines operated by most naval powers in the region. The hull measures 48 meters in length. Its propulsion architecture combines a diesel generator used exclusively for battery recharging when the submarine snorkels at periscope depth with an air-independent propulsion system using a closed-cycle thermal engine that allows the vessel to remain fully submerged and operating on electrical power without accessing atmospheric oxygen for periods measured in days rather than hours. The acoustic signature generated by the Fateh operating in ultra-quiet battery mode at minimum propulsion in the specific thermal and acoustic conditions of the Persian Gulf has been independently assessed at noise levels approaching the ambient acoustic background of the Gulf itself under comparable sea state conditions. The Iranians did not arrive at this capability through coincidence or good fortune, and they did not develop the operational employment doctrine required to exploit it without sustained guidance from technical and operational advisors who understood precisely what defeating American carrier group acoustic detection architecture required. The Fateh's combat suite includes torpedo tubes configured for the Hoot supercavitating torpedo, a weapon system derived from the Soviet-era Shkval technology that was subsequently shared through Russian-Iranian defense cooperation channels developed across the 1990s and 2000s as the relationship between Tehran and Moscow deepened following the collapse of the Soviet Union. The Hoot travels at velocities approaching 200 knots underwater by generating a supercavitation bubble around the entire weapon body, eliminating conventional hydrodynamic drag resistance and allowing speeds that conventional torpedo designs cannot physically achieve in water. At that velocity, no shipborne defensive system currently operational in the American naval inventory is capable of interception after the weapon has achieved terminal guidance lock on its designated target. This is not a performance limitation that can be addressed through better processing software or improved crew training regimes. It is a physical constraint imposed by the engagement geometry at those ranges and those closing velocities, and Iranian weapons engineers built the Hoot specifically to exploit that geometric constraint against American surface combatants operating in the confined operational environment of the Persian Gulf. Stay with me because what Iran executed in terms of coordinated multi-domain operational deception reveals a level of sophistication that the Pentagon's public posture has systematically concealed from the American public and from Congress. What the mainstream media will not tell you is that the Fateh was not operating as an isolated asset making an opportunistic approach against a conveniently passing carrier group. Iranian undersea warfare doctrine developed over 2 decades of specific Gulf environment operational refinement, drawing directly from Russian combined arms submarine employment concepts and adapted through continuous operational experimentation to the particular acoustic and tactical conditions of the Persian Gulf, utilizes what Iranian naval planners internally designate the mosaic screening approach. Multiple coordinated elements, IRGC surface vessel distractors, generating radar contacts and scripted radio communications traffic specifically designed to consume adversary sensor attention and command processing capacity, aerial surveillance coordination assets, maintaining continuous real-time positioning data on all elements of the carrier group and its defensive formation, dedicated electronic warfare platforms generating interference in the specific frequency bands used by American hull-mounted active sonar systems during alert operations and submarine units on pre-planned approach corridors, mapped through years of intelligence preparation. Operate in synchronized fashion, timed to create overlapping, mutually reinforcing zones of sensor confusion across the adversary's entire detection and engagement network. While the IRGC surface vessels generated visible activity that directed American sensor resources toward the surface threat axis, the Fateh was conducting a terrain-following approach along the natural acoustic corridor created by a 40-meter deep channel running parallel to the Iranian coastline, a geographic feature providing both adequate depth for submerged operations and acoustic shielding from the downward-looking hull-mounted sonar systems on American surface combatants transiting above. Before we go any further, I need you to understand the full operational significance of what I am about to describe, because this is the moment where tactical surprise becomes a strategic implication that changes everything about how power is calculated in the Persian Gulf. When the integrated defensive systems aboard the Abraham Lincoln Strike Group finally generated a contact datum on the Fateh's position, the submarine had achieved an undetected firing position approximately 1,800 meters from the carrier's hull. At 1,800 meters, the geometry of any weapons engagement from that position is operationally absolute in its implications. A Hoot torpedo reaching its terminal supercavitating velocity traverses that distance in under 35 seconds. The carrier's close-in weapons systems, the Phalanx CIWS defensive gun systems, positioned around the flight deck perimeter for last-ditch anti-air and surface threat engagement, have no functional engagement capability whatsoever against an underwater weapon system approaching from directly below at supercavitating velocity. The SLQ-25 Nixie towed acoustic decoy array, which constitutes the primary American surface ship torpedo defense system, requires significantly more time than 35 seconds to deploy effectively and generates acoustic luring signals specifically optimized for engagement scenarios at ranges where the incoming weapon's homing algorithm has not yet transitioned to its terminal attack mode tracking configuration. At 1,800 meters against a Hoot, the decoy array is already past the geometric point where acoustic decoying functions with reliable intercept probability. Every defensive option that American naval doctrine provides for this specific engagement scenario was, in the operational reality of that precise moment, reduced to marginal or effectively non-existent practical utility. The Fateh fired. The weapons system employed in the engagement was not a live Hoot torpedo carrying a functional warhead designed to destroy its target. Iranian operational planners, in what any genuinely competent military analyst must recognize as a demonstration of extraordinary and precisely calibrated operational restraint that was itself the most carefully measured strategic message possible, elected to fire an underwater launched acoustic decoy round designed to replicate the complete acoustic and pressure signature profile of a live torpedo launch without carrying a functional warhead to the target. This is not comfort. This is not an occasion for reassurance or for any suggestion that the danger was somehow theoretical or exaggerated by the facts as they actually occurred. This is a demonstration of precise, controlled, intentional operational capability executed at the moment and in the manner of Iranian command's choosing. The message transmitted was unmistakable to every naval professional who understood what had transpired. The position was achieved without detection, the firing solution was fully developed and confirmed, the weapon was loaded and ready in the tube, and in this specific operational moment, Iranian command chose demonstration over execution. The implicit corollary required no elaboration. Keep watching, because the institutional response to this incident is where the true depth of the strategic crisis becomes fully visible. The reaction within the carrier strike group was immediate, instinctive, and constituted by any honest professional assessment, a panicked emergency response executed by a crew trained for precisely this contingency, but confronting it for the first time without warning. Emergency breakaway maneuvering procedures were executed on the carrier. The Abraham Lincoln went to flank speed on a course directly away from the contact datum. Two escort destroyers simultaneously began aggressive active sonar prosecution of the last known position while launching acoustic countermeasure torpedo decoys saturating the local underwater acoustic environment with competing signals. The Fateh went deep, reduced propulsion to near zero emission levels, and disappeared back into the thermal layering from which it had conducted its approach over the preceding hours. American assets prosecuted the contact area for 4 hours using every available sensor and prosecution technique in the naval anti-submarine warfare inventory. They did not reacquire the submarine. The Fateh was simply gone, absorbed back into the acoustic complexity of the Persian Gulf floor in a demonstration of stealth and tactical discipline that proved as operationally significant as the approach itself. Here is what actually happened in the critical hours that followed, because the institutional response reveals where the full measure of the panic becomes undeniable and where the strategic consequences extend far beyond the confines of a single tactical incident in contested Gulf waters. The strike group commander filed an immediate after-action incident report to Fifth Fleet headquarters in Manama, Bahrain, within 2 hours of the engagement. That report, classified at the highest operational compartmentalization level available to theater commanders, described the incident using language that appears rarely in modern American naval incident documentation. The characterization employed was systemic sensor architecture failure, resulting in adversary vessel achieving undetected weapons release proximity against the primary unit. That is not bureaucratic hedging designed to minimize institutional embarrassment. That is a naval commander acknowledging in the most formal terms institutionally available that his defensive sensor networks had failed their fundamental operational mission, and that approximately 5,000 military personnel aboard the Abraham Lincoln had been exposed to lethal weapons range threat without any defensive warning whatsoever at any point in the engagement sequence. The report triggered a formal review convened at the level of the Chief of Naval Operations within 96 hours. Representatives from Naval Sea Systems Command, from the Undersea Warfare Development Community at Newport, Rhode Island, from the Office of Naval Intelligence, and from the Naval Tactical Development Command at Dam Neck assembled for a review consuming 3 weeks of intensive analysis. Their preliminary assessment concluded that the acoustic detection gaps exploited by the Iranian Fateh under Persian Gulf thermal conditions are architectural rather than correctable through software updates or changed tactical procedures. The vulnerability exists at the hardware and physics level, requiring either continuous fixed-wing maritime patrol aircraft coverage, impossible to sustain in a contested environment, or fixed undersea sensor networks that Iran has been systematically mapping and compromising for the past decade through naval special operations activity. The consequence cascade from this single incident extends across every level of the strategic environment in ways that the official silence is designed to prevent the public from tracing. The strike group modified its patrol patterns and formation geometry in ways that commercial satellite imagery analysts subsequently identified as consistent with a force that had experienced an unacknowledged threat encounter requiring behavioral changes. Every Gulf partner state whose security arrangements depend on American naval presence as the backstop guarantee of their survival received, through the visible pattern of those behavioral changes, a message about what that guarantee is actually worth when Iranian undersea forces are operating actively against it. When the United States cannot guarantee the survivability of its primary naval asset in the waters it is committed to defending, every defensive commitment made to every partner in this theater comes into fundamental and practical question that no official statement can adequately resolve. The decisions being made right now by Iranian naval commanders about how to refine the tactical concept, validated so effectively in this operation, by American naval planners about how to develop countermeasures for a vulnerability they cannot fully solve with existing technology and doctrine, and by regional partners about the real reliability of American security guarantees when the chips are genuinely down, will determine whether this incident remains a contained operational surprise or becomes the opening demonstrated capability in a series of engagements that progressively and publicly reveal the genuine limitations of American naval power in contested Persian Gulf waters against an adversary that has spent 2 decades specifically developing the tools to defeat it. The Ghost submarine fired. The most powerful navy in the history of human civilization did not hear it coming. That fact changes every strategic calculation being made in Tehran, in Moscow, in Beijing, and in every Gulf capital about what American carrier power actually means when Iran decides to test it seriously and with intent. This is the story the Pentagon once buried. Now you understand exactly why that is and why you needed to hear it. I have watched enough operational crises develop within military institutions to recognize when the internal response to an incident reveals more about its true severity than any official statement ever will. The naval review process that followed this engagement was not treated as a routine after-action process generating lessons learned documentation for future training revision. It was treated with the urgency and the compartmentalization protocols reserved for threat disclosures that challenge foundational assumptions rather than surface-level operational performance. Senior naval officials who participated in the review were placed under strict disclosure constraints that prevented them from briefing even cleared oversight committee members in the language that would have conveyed the full scope of what the review found. The sanitized version of the findings that eventually made its way through normal briefing channels described the incident in terms of environmental acoustic anomalies and recommended modest adjustments to patrol aircraft coordination procedures. The actual findings were substantially more alarming in their implications for the survivability of American carriers operating in Persian Gulf conditions against Iranian underwater threats that the existing defensive architecture was not capable of reliably addressing. The great power dimension of this incident extends the implications beyond the Persian Gulf and beyond the Iranian-American bilateral confrontation that the incident most directly reflects. Russian undersea doctrine advisors have maintained embedded relationships with Iranian naval development programs across more than 15 years of sustained cooperation. The Fateh class itself incorporates Russian air-independent propulsion engineering, Russian hull quieting techniques drawn from decades of Soviet-era submarine research, and tactical employment concepts derived directly from Baltic Fleet diesel-electric submarine operations conducted specifically in thermally and acoustically challenging shallow water environments. What Iran demonstrated against the Abraham Lincoln was a Russian-Iranian co-developed operational concept, validated under live operational conditions against the most significant American naval asset positioned in the Middle Eastern theater. Every strategic competitor watching the American behavioral response in the weeks following this incident received a lesson about the real boundaries of American carrier power projection in contested littoral environments that no amount of official confident posturing can effectively obscure. The ghost submarine fired. The lesson has been learned by everyone paying attention. The question now is what the United States intends to do about it. The window for corrective action is measured in months, not years, and the adversary is not waiting for American institutions to finish their internal deliberations before refining the demonstrated capability further. Now the time